Good morning and welcome to Greece and my ongoing European visa, residency and citizenship journey, which I'm going to detail in this video. I suppose ultimately this is probably a guide, if you like, a how-to. It's a collection of my experiences, my learning as I've gone through this journey, and I continue to go through this journey. But in 2021, my wife and I have been living in Vietnam for 10 years. My wife is Greek, so we decided we were going to move to Greece, where we now live. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I have a British passport. And thanks to Brexit, the policy that keeps on giving, I no longer have residency rights in Europe. So I've had to go through this visa and residency journey. And I'm going to share those thoughts with you today. Hopefully it's useful to you if you're interested in moving to Europe or living in Europe or retiring in Europe. And I talk about Europe because although I'm in Greece, the legislation is common across Europe. The numbers may change, but as I said, the legislation is common across Europe. And this is my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an immigration specialist. I would use this as a guide, but I would seek professional advice should you be pursuing this journey yourselves. So I hope this is useful to you. For those of you interested, I'm walking around Argos and the surrounding area today. Argos, one of the very oldest cities in Europe, place of Greek mythology. Fantastic, fantastic place, underrated by tourists. But I've split this video into 10 sections or lessons. You can skip around, obviously, to the ones that are relevant to you. But what I've learned in my visa journey is that you really need to understand all the options. Often they overlap, and if you don't understand every option, you may miss opportunities or learning. So it's up to you whether you want to skip around or not. But my lesson number one is holiday. If you're coming here on holiday and you're from one of the normal demographic nations, I'm talking about US, Canada, Australia, UK, etc., you will not need a visa. You're entitled, under European law, to visit this country, provided you have a passport and you meet all the necessary rules, for 90 days out of 180. So every 180 days, 6 months, you can spend 3 months in Europe. You are not allowed to spend more than that time here. If you overstay, you will be banned from Europe for 3 years. So I highly recommend, and that's all European countries, I highly recommend that you observe those rules. And if you wish to stay longer, then follow my guide to getting the next visa that I'll talk about. But there are 105 countries who are not allowed to visit without what's known as a Schengen visa. And you can apply for this up to 6 months before your visit. You apply at your local embassy or consulate or visa application company, because sometimes these are subcontracted, and you will be required to submit an application, submit documentation, probably demonstrate that you have necessary funds to visit, etc. And you will be expected to undertake an interview. So it's not guaranteed that you'll be allowed to visit. But for the majority of people who typically visit Greece or the European Union, you can stay here 90 days out of every 180 and enjoy yourself. These rules are going to change, unfortunately, fairly shortly. They keep pushing it back. But at the moment, in April 2025, even if you're an American or a UK citizen or Australian, you will need to apply for what's known as an ETIAS. Now, you'll apply online via an e-form, effectively. You pay a €7 fee, and what it will allow you to do then is exactly what you can already do without that. Enter for up to 90 days out of every 180. But from April 2025, you are effectively going to need a visa for a holiday. And that visa will remain valid for 3 years. Now, my lesson number two is do it yourself as far as you can, but be prepared to seek help when you need it. There are many firms online. If you search online for European visas or Greek residency or Greek citizenship, you will be bombarded with a plethora of adverts and firms online who are prepared to help you with this. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether they're good or bad. What I will say is they are very, very expensive. But I think whether you choose to use one or not depends on your individual circumstances. I would always recommend trying to do it yourself. If you have time to travel to Greece or the country that you're choosing to try and obtain a visa in, and you can employ, if you need, a local lawyer and possibly an accountant, you're going to be much better off and it's going to be much cheaper. So just before we get into the nitty-gritty of my experiences of applying for visas, residency and citizenship here in Greece, I just want to talk about the differences between the three because they are important. A visa, you go to your local embassy, you apply for, let's say, a 3-month or a 1-year visa, and allows you to visit the European Union or a country in the European Union for a given period of time. But you probably can't work here, you have no rights, you won't be able to buy a car, you might not be able to rent certain types of property, etc. It's just a visitor's visa. Then you have residency. Residency is a step up. It's normally for a much longer period, perhaps, for example, a minimum of 5 years. And you get temporary and permanent residency. And residency effectively allows you to operate as a person living in this country. So you could buy a car, you can rent property, you can work here, etc. But what it doesn't give you is any of the state protections and benefits. You don't get social security, you don't get embassy protection overseas, etc. And then finally you have citizenship. Citizenship allows you to obtain a passport for a European member nation. And in doing so, you get all the state protections. You have social security benefits, you have pension benefits, you have embassy protection overseas. And it's the ultimate goal for many people. Now, I keep lumping Greek and European immigration rights into the same bracket, and that's because they are. They're based on exactly the same European legislation, immigration legislation, which was published in 2020. So what I'm saying specifically about Greece will apply to all the other Schengen nations in Europe. That's 29 nations. The numbers may vary a little bit, but the legislation is the same across Europe. So what I've learned in Greece is relevant everywhere. And that brings me on to lesson number 4. Have you won the citizenship or visa lottery? Because if you are a direct descendant, if you have a parent or a grandparent, or even sometimes a great-grandparent of European descent, then you are considered a European citizen and entitled to skip all the stages I'm about to talk about and apply directly for European citizenship. Your passport. This is like the simplest route of all, and it really is the simplest route of all. I don't believe there's one country in Europe who won't grant you a passport if you can prove, and this is the key, if you can prove your parent or your grandparent or possibly your great-grandparent held a passport in that nation and was born in that nation. And that's the key thing. You have to produce a birth certificate for that individual from the country that you are applying to, and you have to produce a passport for that individual from the country you are applying for. Even if it's your great-grandfather and he died 50 years ago, you've got to find a passport that he had at that time, proving his citizenship in Greece or wherever else it was. But if you can do that, you've won. And there are firms who will offer to do this for you. They'll look at your genealogy, they'll track through documents. Now, if it's a very complicated situation, perhaps it's worth it. But I've done a little bit of research on these firms. The cheapest I found said $6,000 for the first applicant and $5,000 for every following applicant. So these are not cheap things to do. And personally, if you have a relative who was born in Greece or anywhere else in the European Union, you're going to follow that route, just do it yourself, because all you need to do is prove who you are, prove you are related to them, and produce their birth certificate and passport. Finally, after all this chat, I'm going to get down to the nitty-gritty detail of what options are available to you should you wish to apply for visas, residency or citizenship in the European Union. And you have 4 options, and which option you have to start with depends on your individual circumstances, and I'll detail each of them separately in the coming sections. But in summary, you have 4 options. You have a 1-year national visa, you have a 3-year financially independent person visa, you have a 5-year temporary residency visa, and you have a 10-year permanent residency visa. And those are common across Europe. And ultimately, should you be lucky enough, you may be able to apply for citizenship. So you have 4 options plus citizenship. Now then, my lesson 6 is the first type of visa that 90% of people wishing to extend their stay in Europe or in Greece will have to apply for, and that is a 1-year national type D visa. Again, common across Europe, doesn't matter which country you're in, process is the same. And there are certain categories of people who can skip this visa, but as I said, 90% of you will not be able to. And there are 9 categories of application which are considered, and these include, to give you some examples, being a student, or perhaps coming here for charity work, being a musician or belonging to an artistic group and coming here for a concert, or being a business leader, being a financially independent person, or being a digital nomad. And that's probably the big one that people use this for nowadays. As a digital nomad, you apply for this visa, it allows you to come here and potentially work in Greece for an overseas employer for up to a year. And the key thing here is that each category, depending on which category you apply for, will have different requirements of application. So it's really critical that you get this category right, because otherwise you are going to be failed. Now, the application process is actually really quite complicated and involved, and from experience, it takes at least 3 months to prepare the documentation for this. Some of the documentation will need to be notarized and legalized. In other words, it will have to be witnessed by a solicitor and then signed by a government authority or embassy to say that it is a true copy. Some of it will have to be translated if it's not in Greek. This is a very involved process and should not be taken lightly. And when I say 3 months, it can take longer. It's not an easy thing to do and shouldn't be taken lightly. But let's say you're applying. What do you need to do? Well, firstly, obviously, you have to complete an application form. You also have to make an appointment with the local visa authority in your country of residence. Now, that might be your consulate, it might be your embassy, it might be a third-party company who they have contracted these services to. It just depends where you live. You then have to have a passport with at least 1 year, 3 months remaining on it. 1 year because you're going to be in the country for 1 year, and 3 months because you have to have 3 months left on the passport from the day of your exit. So 1 year, 3 months left on the passport. You also need 2 blank pages in your passport so they can put the visa in it. You then have several involved processes that you have to complete. Firstly, you will have to provide a government criminal record check from your country of residence. Now, this will almost certainly have to be notarized and legalized. You will have to undertake a medical to WHO regulations and EU requirements. Now, I've done these medicals before, not for Greece, but for Vietnam, and they're basically the same. You have to have a chest x-ray, you have to have a blood test, they're checking for communicable diseases, etc. They're making sure that you're healthy and you're not going to present a risk to the population. You will have to have appropriate medical or travel insurance to demonstrate that for the duration of your stay, and you'll have to have this before you attend your interview, for the duration of your stay, you can cover your medical costs, any emergencies, etc. Dependent on the type of visa you're applying for, if you're a digital nomad, for example, you may have to provide a contract of employment from your employer and a letter stating that they are happy for you to work as a digital nomad in Greece or wherever you happen to be in the European Union. If you're a financially independent person, you will need to provide evidence of sufficient funds to allow this visa to be issued. So it becomes a very complicated process dependent on the category under which you apply. But 90% of people will have to apply for this 1 year Type D national visa, regardless of where they wish to go in Europe, should they wish to stay for more than 90 days out of every 180. Now, number 7 is a 3-year visa, which you can apply for following the 1 year national visa only. You have to have a 1 year national visa first, and it's for financially independent persons. Now, they're not really talking about billionaires here or people with lots of money in the bank. What they're talking about is pensioners, people who are in receipt of a private pension and can prove it. And that's a key thing. You have to be able to prove it, and you have to meet some minimum requirements. And I'll be honest with you, the pensioners I know here who have been successful have been very lucky, because apparently the refusal rates for this type of visa in Europe are extremely high. It gives you residency for 3 years in your chosen country. It does not give you the right to work here, and you have to reapply after 3 years. In order to get this visa, you have to have a minimum monthly income of €3,500 per month for yourself, plus 20% additional funds if you have a spouse, plus 15% additional funds for every child that you might have who is under 18 years of age. So it becomes very expensive very quickly. And moreover, they will not accept a state pension or social security or anything like that. It has to be private. It has to be your own funds, and you have to be able to prove it. You have to have apostilled, notarized, legalized documentation, bank statements, statements of pension, etc. in Greek. They have to be translated to prove this. And as I said, I've heard it's very, very difficult to do. But that option is available to you if you're a pensioner and you want to come and retire in Europe or in Greece. It's complicated, it's difficult. As I said, you have to do Type 1D first and everything that is involved with that, and then prove your income, but you can do it. So this brings me on to my lesson number 8, the 5-year temporary residency. And I was incredibly lucky. I met the criteria to skip the 1 year Type D visa, go straight to this one. And this is where I entered my story in 2021. So I am married to a Greek. I'm incredibly lucky. I won life's lottery, as my wife would keep telling me, and I would agree with her. It entitles me to apply for a 5-year residency, temporary residency in Greece. And that is fabulous. What I have to do is I don't have to do all the shenanigans, all the documentation associated with the Type D visa. I can skip all that. What I have to do is prove that I am married to her and that I am who I say I am. So I have to have birth certificate, passport, translated, notarized in Greek. My wife has to prove who she is. Well, easy for her because she has a Greek ID card, she has a Greek passport, she has a Greek birth certificate, and then we have to prove that we were married. The certificate has to have been issued in the last 6 months. In our case, it was dead easy because we were married in Greece, we were married in Athens, and therefore we can go to the Athenian ecclesiastical authorities, we can have them issue in the last 6 months our marriage certificate in Greek from a body that the Greek immigration office will accept, and prove to them that we are married. And from that point forward, it should be relatively easy. We have to have, and to do this process, you have to have a bank account in Greece. You have to have what's known as a family situation in Greece. That is a registered situation with the Greek authorities saying that you're married on a computer. You can do that with KEP. And you have to have an AFM number, an AFME number, the Greek tax number, showing that your Greek taxes are clear. So it's not absolutely easy. You have to be relatively established here in Greece, but provided you are, then you go to, you also have to have an address in Greece. You go to the office which is local to your address. In my case, unfortunately, it was the Peloponnese office in Athens. Now there's 3 offices in Athens and there are offices dotted all around the country, immigration offices where you can apply. But unfortunately for me, Peloponnese is about the most popular office in the whole of the country. And when I got there, there was a huge stack of paper behind the desks and they said to me, that's fine, well, you can apply, but it's a 2.5 year waiting list. Now we used at that point a local lawyer, cost us €500, but the reason we did that was because she knew people in the office and she facilitated speeding up the process, shall we say. So I went from 2.5 year waiting list to 1 year waiting list. So you apply, you fill in the application forms, you go along with your lawyer, you submit your documents, and they give you a blue slip of paper which effectively becomes your ID card for the period of your application. It allows you to enter and exit Greece as you wish without having your passport stamped. It gives you visa rights here. And then towards the end of this 1 year, my piece of paper was going to expire because it only lasts 1 year. So I started putting a lot of pressure on my lawyer, who literally the next day said, oh, they've got your Greek ID card to collect now. So it just goes to show sometimes you have to put pressure on people. But anyway, so after a year at the Peloponnese office, I went along, picked up my Greek, and it is a European ID card. It has my biometric information on it. It's effectively within Europe a passport. I can travel across Europe on this. I'm also allowed to work in Greece. I have market access and I'm incredibly lucky. But that only lasts for 5 years. And I am in the process because next year I have to go to the next process, which I'll explain in a minute. And it always stresses me because these things are just bureaucratic, regardless of how you look at them and regardless of what you may feel about them. But then there are 2 other groups of people who may be able to skip the 1 year national visa and go straight to the 5 year visa. Some of them choose not to. But you do have that option should you be organised enough. And as I said, preparation and organisation and doing it yourself is a key bit here. The first is golden visa. So golden visa, probably lots of you have heard of it and I finally got to it. If you wish to buy effectively 5 year residency in Greece or the European Union, you have the option via a golden visa. Now in Greece, you have 3 property options to do so. The first is if you wish to buy in Athens or in Saloniki or any island with a permanent population greater than 3,100 people, you have to spend €800,000 on property here in Greece. Now that can be more than 1 property. And what a lot of people do, unfortunately, is they buy 3 or 4 properties and then they Airbnb them and they get their residency, not passport, residency in return. And that residency covers them, their spouse and their dependents. So it's a good way for very rich people to effectively buy residency in Europe. If you wish to buy outside those areas, in more deprived areas of Greece, shall we say, or lesser popular areas of Greece, it's €400,000, but that €400,000 has to be spent on 1 single property and it has to be at least 120 square metres in size. And then finally, and I've never heard of anyone doing this because all of these are very difficult to do, finally you can purchase a listed or scheduled monument in Greece for €250,000 or more, and then do it up to the required standards of the Ministry of Culture within 4 years and receive 5 year residency for doing that. Now, I said this is difficult. It's last year, I think there were 8,500 applications and there were 2,500 approvals. This year, 2024, there have been, as far as I can find on the statistics to date, about 2,000 applications and 124 approvals. So do not think this is an easy route. The third option available to you is as a financial investor. And again, it's very similar to Golden Visa, but instead of investing in property, you invest between 500,000 and 800,000 euros in approved Greek assets. Now, they could be government bonds, they could be specific approved shares, they could be investment schemes in Greece which are approved by the government. And if you do that and you maintain, and this is the key thing, you have to maintain that investment for the duration of your visa, you again will be offered a 5-year temporary residency visa. But I've never, ever met anyone who's been successful in doing this. I know people who have done the Golden Visa via property. Maybe I just move in the wrong circles, but these are not easy routes to deliver residency. The Greek government in particular now is very reticent about granting these. They will want to know where the money's come from. They will want to know your income. They will want to know a lot of personal details about your finances because they've been put under enormous pressure from the European Union to make sure that the people who are applying for and being granted these routes are of reputable background, shall we say. And quite rightly so, to be honest, as someone who's now resident in Greece myself. Number 9, we are approaching, so to speak, the top of the visa tree, and we are discussing 10-year permanent residency, here in Greece in my case, but anywhere in Europe. And this is something that I am going to be applying for next year, because my 5-year residency, temporary residency, will be expiring, and I need to renew to keep my rights here. And the 10-year permanent residency is only open to people who have firstly held a 5-year temporary residency, but it's also very restrictive beyond that. You have to be able to prove, and I have to be able to prove, that I have been resident in Greece for the majority of my time of that 5-year residency. So if you've got a golden visa, you've been given your 5-year temporary residency, but you haven't really spent much time in Europe or Greece, you are not going to be eligible for the 10-year permanent residency. It's extremely restrictive. I will also have to present my tax statements, audited tax statements, to show that I've been paying tax, that I don't owe any money, etc., etc. But provided I can do all that, or you can do all that, or anyone can do all that, and you meet the requirements, you will then be given 10-year permanent residency. And that opens one final door to my number 10. By the way, for anyone interested, this is the Temple of Dionysus, a Roman construction here in Argos, completely unmaintained, never visited. Fantastic, would have been awash with water. You can see maybe behind me the cistern. They would have had water flowing down this hill. All Greek monuments in Greece were awash with water in Greek and Roman times, completely different to the dry places we see today. But this was the Temple of Dionysus here in Argos. So, finally, number 10, and it brings me, metaphorically at least, to the top of the tree, or at least here, Argos Castle, above Argos itself. And we are talking about Greek citizenship. To obtain Greek citizenship, in my opinion, is a privilege, it's an honour, something that I'm aspiring to do in the future, but it's not easy to do, and it shouldn't be easy to do. There are 3 routes. We've already talked about Birthright. Congratulations, you've won the lottery. Go straight, pass go, collect 200, and your Greek citizenship, provided you can prove it. Number 2, my situation, fortunately, marriage. If you're married to a Greek and you have a Greek child together, someone with a Greek passport registered with a Greek situation, you are entitled, after 3 years residency in Greece, to apply for Greek citizenship, the Greek passport. Now, what that means for me is I have to prove that I've lived here. I haven't been off somewhere else and not living here. And it also means that I have to prove I've been paying my taxes, I have to present tax audits, etc. But it's not impossible to do. I have chosen not to do it yet because I want to get my 10-year permanent Greek residency first. Then I will start that process. That process is not quick. The government says it should be 1 year, but in reality it's probably 3 to 4 years, if you're lucky. I've heard of people waiting 7 years. And then finally, we have citizenship from residency. Now, if you have been resident in Greece for 7 years, and you don't meet either the birthright or the marriage criteria, then you have the opportunity to apply for a passport here, for residency, for citizenship here. But again, that is not easy, and you have an extra requirement to meet. You have to do a citizenship test, and in that citizenship test, not only do you have to display intimate knowledge of Greece and Greece history, but you also have to demonstrate a B1 language standard, which, as I understand it, is the sort of level that an 18-year-old would be if they got a C in their national exams in Greek. So you have to be able to read a bit, you have to be able to write a bit, and you have to be able to hold a conversation with some detail. Not easy. And there are schools in Athens in particular who offer these services just to train people for these citizenship exams. So it's not an easy thing to do. And I'm incredibly lucky that I married a Greek. I did win the lottery. My wife will scoff at me saying that if she ever watches this video, but it's true, I did win the lottery, not just because my wife is Greek, but because I love her to bits. And I love Greece. And one day, if I'm fortunate enough to be entitled to a passport here, to earn a passport here, I will be eternally grateful, because you can see this is a fabulous, fabulous land. So I hope this video has been of some use to you. I've tried to address an extremely complex subject. You will judge whether I've been any good at that or not. I have left some areas out completely, such as student visas and so on, just because it overcomplicates things. And I wanted to stick to the areas that I've researched and I have experience of. As I said, if you are going to go through a visa or residency process here in Europe, the more you can understand about the options available, even if they're not relevant to you, the better you will understand the options available to you, and how to approach them. So I love Argos, as you can probably tell. I love Greece. The views are fantastic. I hope you watch some of my other videos. I think I'm probably going to do hire cars and driving in Greece next. I might have a slight intermission because I have a love for Mycenaean history, and I just need to do a Mycenaean video. But thank you for watching. I hope it's been useful. I am not a lawyer. I am not an immigration specialist. I am merely a guy going through the process who has tried to offer you opinion based on his experiences here. You need to do your own research. Take your own advice. And don't use mine as a basis for everything. Thank you for watching.